Hello everyone and welcome to Ghost Turd Stories. I'm your host Troy Gent. Ghost Turd Stories' mission is using humorous stories from veterans and first responders to reduce the burden of families whose veteran or first responder committed suicide. Ghost Turd Stories' vision is to use humor from veteran and first responder stories to prevent suicide within our ranks and reduce the burden of families whose veteran or first responder committed suicide. We hoped to attract veterans and first responders, as well as those interested in knowing more about what it's like to be in our shoes while we wear or wore those shoes. Welcome to Ghost Turd Stories. This is Troy Gent, your host. Today I have my father as a guest. He's a veteran from the Vietnam era. He served in the National Guard. Welcome, Dad. How are you?
Absolutely fantastic, Troy. Good to be here.
My dad's name is Robert Gent. Dad, what units did you serve with when you were in the National Guard?
Actually, I went into the Army Reserve, and I wanted to go in the Marine Corps originally, but I had been out of high school for about 3.5 years, had a year of college. I was in South America for 2.5 years on a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Got home, couldn't get in a Marine Corps unit in Portland, Oregon. I did want to go full-time. I wanted a reserve unit, and I found a Army Reserve unit in Vancouver Army Barracks, and so I enlisted in the United States Army Reserve in late spring of 1964, nearly 60 years ago.
60 years ago. What was your MOS?
Actually, they put me as a clerk typist, which I hated, and so I switched over to armored cavalry. I was in armored cavalry units and artillery.
You were originally assigned as a clerk typist, but how long did it take for you to realize or to tell someone, hey, this ain't gonna work for me, I gotta switch?
That was after I got out of basic training and advanced training. After basic training, they put me in a clerk typist in Fort Irwin, California, not very far from the Great Desert there.
Why did they do that? What did they see in you that said, he's a clerk typist?
Because I had pretty good English skills and I had a year of college. That's why.
Okay.
I could chew gum and walk down the hall at the same time. And I could spell my name, so they made me a clerk typist.
That's something to be said about joining the military is some guys literally can't walk and chew gum at the same time, so...
I experienced that when I was in basic training. I was at Fort Ord, California. We had over 100,000 troops. It was one of the largest training areas in the United States. Irregardless whether you were in the National Guard or Army Reserve, you're in a regular Army unit. And our company, Company A, had about 150 regular Army unit members in basic training. We had about 100 National Guard troops from Idaho, of all places, and then there were several of us that were Army Reserve in that unit. It was a different world at that time, pre-Vietnam, and the idea was that if you got in trouble or didn't graduate from high school and got in trouble with the law, they gave you a choice often. Do you want to go in the Army, or do you want to go to jail? And they cleaned up a lot of the military after Vietnam, but I was in a unit of individuals that a lot of them had got in trouble with the law. And today they wouldn't even qualify for the United States military. Today only about 2 out of every 10 qualify to even be inducted into the military. At that time, if you could chew gum, walk down the hall at the same time, and spell your name, they let you in the military. So it was crazy. I was in a company unit with some crazy people. I don't need to demean the military in any ways, but I'd had a year of college. I'd been in South America for 2.5 years, and there I was in the United States Army in Fort Ord, California, with a bunch of National Guard troops from Idaho. Most of them were from Idaho. And like I said, some of those individuals had a choice, either go to jail or go in the Army. And Vietnam was heating up, and so They said, oh, I'll go in the Army. That gives you a bit of background on the unit. There was some crazy things that went on there. Very serious-minded person. I'm highly competitive, and yet I'm always in for a good laugh, and I don't mean to demean anybody, but some of the things that happened to me, you can't hardly help but laughing. And the regular Army cadre, a lot of those had served in World War II and had been in Korea, and they had been in combat situations. There they were with a bunch of recruits that weren't highly respected. They referred to them as no goods. Well, how would that make you feel if you were in the regular Army unit and they were saying you were no good? Well, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy that some of them acted about the way that they were treated, but some of the things that happened made me wonder about how they even got into the National Guard, and I can tell you about those if you're interested.
Yeah, I'd love to hear them.
Well, first off, they would line up at Fort Ord, California, and we had this first sergeant I had little respect for. I forgot his name. I wanted to forget his name. I wanted to forget who he was, but he was the most dirty-mouthed individual that I'd ever been around. And there we were, 5:30 in the morning, company formation, and he would start cussing us out. And I would sit there, and I just spent 2.5 years in South America for an LDS mission for my church, talking about the things of God. And our initial formations, they would call out names. Some of those individuals, I thought, well, how in the world did they even get in any military organization? They looked like they were pretty out of shape to me. And of course, I was about 23, and they were 17, 18 years old in the Guard units. And we had this one fellow. He had to weigh 300 pounds, and his name was Private George or Georgie or something. I forget exactly. But anyway, right off the bat, they said, "Hey, fat boy." He was Private Fat Boy. "Private Fat Boy." "Yes, Sergeant." "Drop down and give me 5. Drop down and give me 5. "Yes, Sergeant." He dropped down, and there was no way he was going to give him 5, give him 4, give him 3, give him 2. He couldn't even give him 1. "Private Fat Boy, give me 1. He would grunt and roll around, and all of us are sitting there sort of serious, feeling sorry for him. And then he says, hey, you troopers, get down and pick the fat boy up, okay?" They picked the fat boy up. They knew that he wasn't going to make it. He says, "Fat boy, follow the back of the company." And he was through. And after that, we had regular training, and Private Fat Boy was out there doing the sprinklers until they got him out. We thought he was pretty fortunate. Maybe we should act like that so we didn't have to go through the regular training. So Private Fat Boy made it for 2 weeks before they sent him home back to Idaho. Now, that was one of our introductions. The other was they do anything they could to demean the last names of people. And we had this one Private Newtsnowski, I think. I still remember his name. Someone like Newtsnowski. And the first sergeant had trouble. He says, Private Newts, Private No Nuts." We couldn't help it. We all broke up. "Private No Nuts." He says, "You are Private No Nuts." So we'd go through training, and he did pretty good. He'd stick with us and this and that. And then we finally got to rifle training. We didn't train on the M16. We trained on the M14. And brag a little bit, on the firing range at 50 meters to 300 meters, and it was open sights, and I got pretty good. I qualified as expert. But leading up to that, they gave a little bit of background on how easy it was to fire an M14. So there we were before we got on the firing line. The training sergeant said, "Well, we want to tell you gentlemen that there's no danger whatsoever. There's no kick to these M14s. They're harmless. You just have to put them up your shoulder and squeeze the trigger, and the blanks, they would recoil the same as a regular bullet." And so they went through some training, and then all of a sudden the first sergeant had cued the training sergeant's in on Private No Nuts, and all of a sudden he says, "Private No Nuts, get up here. I want you to put this M14 up your shoulders and just pull the trigger." And he did, kabang! Did that hurt? Oh no, that was great. Okay, No Nuts, put it down towards your stomach. Kabang! That's great. Then he says, pull it a little close to your groin there. He squeezed away and then kabang, kabang. I said, did that hurt? No, that was right. But oh, look at this, oh. And so that training sergeant put his hand down, had 3 or 4 marbles in his hands underneath his gonads, and he says, look at this. Private No Nuts, they said you're nuts. And he says, okay, Private No Nuts, what are you going to do now? And he said, I can have sex and I don't need to worry about it. I couldn't believe it. They were always pulling them out. So finally, we went through the tear gas chamber, and he made it. We went through in the chlorine chamber. In the chlorine chamber, you have a gas mask on. You keep your gas mask on. You have to go in, take the gas mask off, but you get a good breath of fresh air because you have to cite your name, rank, and serial number. Me was Private Gent ER 19803-156. You don't take a breath. And poor Naswowski, he took a breath. They had to pull him out and beat on his chest. Hey, but bless his heart, he made it. And then we had the machine gun test. We had to crawl under wire at night, and machine guns were firing live rounds over us. And we had barbed wire and concertina. We had to crawl through that, at night. They said it was live rounds as M60 machine guns. And maybe it was, maybe it wasn't, but that's what they told us. Says, get your butt up in the air. What's going to happen? Some guy says, well, you get your butt shot off. That's right, trooper. You'll get your butt shot off. So keep your butt down. Then they hit us with tear gas, had to mask up. So they call us all out to make sure we're all there. Where in the world's Private No Nuts at? And so they had to turn the lights on. It was rather sad. There he was, right in the middle of the concertina wire, right in the middle of everything. They had to go out and pull him out. Well, but they stood him in front of all of us. And they says, what happened? What happened, Private No Nuts? And he wet his pants. What happened, Private No Nuts? He says, I guess I wet my pants. I mean, I couldn't, we were all laughing, but we made it through those 6 months of their training. I graduated from college, but I was still in the Army Reserve. But when I moved back to Oregon and got a job, I was in that no name, no good National Guard Oregon. And honestly, Troy, it got worse. It was crazy.
Well, it makes sense because in basic training, there's barriers on each side. But once you get in a unit, there's a lot more flexibility for people to do stupid things because they have so much more agency. So it makes sense that it would get worse.
I was in 6 years. Then I was out and I went back in after Vietnam in the 80s. And they cleaned it up. They had to clean it up. And
so when did you get out the first time?
I got out in 71. And
Okay.
then I went back in 79 or 80.
Okay. And then you did what, 4 more or 6 more?
It was 6 years.
6 more.
And it was a National Guard unit. But in that Oregon National Guard was crazy what went on. One of the situations was we get in big touring buses and leave from the Dalles, Oregon. In the evening, we would go to Boise, Idaho. And the unit there, we were trained outside of Boise in Gowan Field. And it was desert all the way from Freeway 84 all the way to the Snake River. Big training area. A lot of times at night, we would have night maneuvers. I was in scouts, and the scouts were in jeeps, and of course, a lot of times we were wired between two M60 tanks, and you had to be careful because you just had your night lights, and those big M60s, I mean, they'll crush a Jeep. And so you're fairly alert, and we had blanks and simulated combat situations. And I'll never forget one situation. We had this platoon sergeant, and we just did not have respect for him. I don't know what he did on the outside, but he was out of control. And he was an E5, but he would do anything because he wanted to jump to an E6. And so he would give his platoon all these dirty details so that we'd have to pick up garbage and do this and that.
He'd volunteer his man a lot.
Yeah, he would volunteer us, and he would sit in his Jeep and drink beer, or else he would smoke cigarettes. And I think his name was Sergeant Smart. We detested him. We were on maneuvers one night, and he'd volunteered us to do the work, and he'd sit drinking beer and smoking cigarettes.
They'd let him have beer out in the field back then?
They would. It was crazy. That was
Okay.
pre-Vietnam. We'd have to round up about 2 o'clock in the morning, and then you had blanks. You had to clear your weapons with Sergeant Smart. We call him Sergeant Smartass. And so anyway, we were all lined up there, and it says, weapon clear. And of course you have to click, click, taking the blanks out, click, 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 click. But no one knew where anyone was at because it was dark and, half asleep, and he would put his head down and clear weapon, click, click.
He was looking down
into the weapon.
Like in the barrel or into the chamber?
Into the chamber.
Into the chamber, okay.
Yeah, he would look into the chamber, and it's 2 o'clock in the morning. We'd been on all day long. We were half tired. He was half asleep. And a fellow trooper left his blanket on purpose. So he put his head down to the chamber. Clear weapon. Ga-bang! At 2:30 in the morning. And he said, who did that? 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 No one was going to say anything when there's about 30 of us lined up. And someone bounced around. He said, give me the name of that person. Give me the name of that person. I want him. No one said anything. And so we got back at him a little bit that way. And then the next day, they gave us some more dirt. But that was all right. Out of the field, it was 50 miles back into the barracks there at Gowan Field. We were intense, and it was rough, and it was hot. My lips were really bothering me, so I got permission to go back in. We had a break for about 6 or 8 hours.
Were they taking back in on a troop transport or a bus? Or
we went on a deuce and a half. So a lot of people took advantage of that, and they were drinking back in the barracks. And so we were in the back of that deuce and a half, driving back out to the unit. And this was about 1968. And so on the way about, and of course you drink a lot of beer, what happens is you got to urinate. And so they were still hung over, and I was sitting back in the bus, back of that deuce and a half, watching them. And so the guy says, hey, I got to take a piss. And so they were urinating out of the back of the deuce and a half. Well, there's a Jeep in back of us, and the guy says, hey, I'm going to piss on that Jeep. And he had quite a bit of urine, so he did. And it landed on the back of the Jeep, and they put his windshield wipers on, and look, everyone's having fun, And what they didn't realize, that was the battalion commander in that Jeep. We had some bedding in the back, and so those guys in there still hung over and says, hey, I wonder what it'd be like to throw this mattress in that Jeep. And he took the mattress out, and he threw the mattress over the Jeep. And it wrapped around the windshield of the Jeep, and the battalion commander of the Jeep went off the road. It was hilarious, and they didn't know that it was the battalion commander. And he pulled back on and got that off, and he came over and honked his horn and pulled us over, and we had to jump out of that Jeep, and they went through, and he knew who had did it. That was welcome to the National Guard.
I've been using Isagenix since 2017. These products have made a world of difference in my quality of life, health, energy, muscle definition, strength, and endurance. My bread and butter products have been the Daily Essential multivitamins with Isagenesis, which is a telomere support supplement, the Isolane meal replacement shake, the Tri-Release protein shake, the collagen, the green drink, and the Cleanse for Life support system. However, Isagenix has many products and can cater to your unique lifestyle and goals. Click the link in the show notes or visit nmp.isagenics.com. That's nmp.isagenics.com to find out more. Besides just using the products, there is an option to partner with me and the company to build your own business with no capital up front. You can do as little as pay for your products and as much as making a full-time income. I love these products and will use them the rest of my life. You can also message me if you have any questions.
Backing up a little bit to basic training is that first sergeant in Fort Ord, California, for some reason I felt he didn't like me. I'm highly competitive. Anytime we would have any competition at all, I always tried to finish towards the top of the group. He'd always say, "Jen, you think you're better than us?" I says, "No, Sergeant, no, Sergeant." We were on train fire one day at Fort Ord. It's beautiful there. During lunch hour, they'd bring lunch in and we'd have our mess kits. I just tried to find a post to sit on, and there's a lot of dust, and I was sitting and eating. I was separated a little bit from the other members of the company. And of course, the language is pretty coarse, and maybe that was part of it, but I wanted something against my back. And I was sitting there, and he says, Jen, in front of the whole company. He called me out, and he was liking the attention he was getting. And nothing against Southern people, but he was a Southern. He spoke with a Southern accent. "You all think you better than us, son?" Says, "No, Sergeant." "Son, when I talk to you, I want you to run to me. Understand, son?" "Yes, Sergeant." "Now, son, you go back there at that post and you crawl to me." And there I was in 6 inches of dust. I was trying to eat lunch, and I crawled to that company commander. And then they had tryouts for the battalion track team. Well, I tried out and I made it, and I was on the mile relay team with 4 outstanding black athletes. I was the white boy on the team, and we won the battalion championship, so we qualified to go for the fort championships. We could have probably won it. We were really good. I'd done nothing wrong. And the day we were supposed to go, and that first sergeant says, "Jen, you're not going, son. You're not going, son." You know, I got to argue with him during boot camp, and so I didn't get a chance to go. And then afterwards, the lieutenant that was head of the battalion track team saw me and said, "What happened, Jen?" I says, "Well," and he just shook his head, but that's the way it was during boot camp. You know, another situation with the Oregon National Guard is that we had this company commander, and he was very controlling. We did not have his respect at all. He had always threatened us. When we were headed to summer camp, one time in Rand, Oregon, he was in the group, and of course people were waiting to get back at him. They pulled a fire extinguisher off the wall after dark. They stuck the fire extinguisher in, turned the fire extinguisher on. And before he could get out of the sleeping bag, it was all filled with foam, you know. No one said anything because there was no respect. And what could he do?
My experience is if you have an officer that doesn't love his men the way that he should, eventually it comes back to bite him. So
yeah. I was a training NCO at Fort Lewis, Washington, one of my summer camps. I was attached to a regular Army unit, and one thing I learned, war is the epitome of dark satanic influences, and war is hell. Troops headed to Vietnam, and 18,000 didn't come home. But there is a God in heaven. I've talked with other individuals that survived combat situations. There's a God in heaven that can protect all of us, and that I know, and that source is available to all of us even now as we're going through some troubled times in America. Sure. Have nothing but respect for those that put their life on the line, and some of them are 6 feet under the grass right now.
Why didn't your unit get called up to Vietnam?
Actually, in Vietnam, they didn't call National Guard units up. They did that in Iraq and Afghanistan.
That's interesting.
Sadly enough, the joke was they would call up the women and the children before they would call up the National Guard. And that's what they told us. And after what I went through, with National Guard troops to some degree. Not to say there's not some outstanding people in the Guard, but there's just a lot of tomfoolery going on there. It was rather crazy. But like I said, after Vietnam in the 80s, the recruiter said, you need to go back in because it's changed, because I didn't want anything to do with it. And I was pretty impressed. Yes, there was drinking and yes and that, but at least they didn't pull a deuce and a half full of warm beer out into the training area.
Why didn't you, so you were in for 12 years total, why didn't you stay in for 8 more years?
I would have, but I went through a divorce after 22 years, and I was remarried, and I just listened to the impression within, and with that marriage and the struggles I had in my previous marriage, I knew it wasn't the right thing to do. And I was being recruited by the Utah National Guard, and I only had 8 more years, but I just knew it wasn't the right thing to do. And so I knew that I needed to do everything I could to make my second marriage a success. That was it. It was just being hopefully a decent husband, Troy.
Well, you've been a good father, so.
Well, I'm still working on it. I'm still there.
I appreciate all the time you've spent with me, Dad, and everything that you've done for me, and it means the world that you came on and decided to talk about some of your experiences.
Works both ways, with Troy. It's like, yes, he's my son, but now it's more like we're brothers, and it's been a great journey being Troy's coach and being his dad and still being close to him and getting to know his wife and daughters. Life doesn't get any better than that, Troy. Thanks a lot.
You bet, Dad. Love you. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you for listening. Please tell your friends and family so that we can bring more joy and awareness to those struggling with suicide ideation and the families who desperately need help after the loss of someone they love to suicide.